My girlfriend said, "I'm going on vacation with my ex. You need to trust me." I replied, "Of course." Then I used that same week to cancel our lease, move out completely, and transfer my savings. When she came back relaxed and smiling, she walked into an empty apartment. Hey viewers, before we move on to the video, please make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button if you want to see more stories like this. Thanks. I already bought the tickets. Cool, and I leave Thursday. You need to trust me on this. She said it like she was reading a grocery list. Flat. Unbothered. Like the words weren't a grenade she'd just dropped on the kitchen table between us. I remember standing there, holding a coffee mug I'd just rinsed, and for a second I genuinely didn't know if I'd heard her correctly. I set the mug down slowly. I looked at her. She looked back at me with this expression I can only describe as preloaded patience, like she'd already rehearsed my reaction and built a defense for it. "You bought the tickets already?" "Yes." "To where?" "Cancun. Just a week. Cole has a friend with a resort connection, so the place is basically free. It's not a big deal." "Not a big deal." She said those 4 words like they were supposed to dissolve everything else she'd just said. Like Cancun and Cole and already bought the tickets were just minor background details I should feel embarrassed for even noticing. I didn't yell. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't throw the mug. I just said, "Okay." And she blinked, surprised, maybe, that there was no explosion. Then she smiled, just slightly, and said, "See? I knew you'd understand." I hadn't understood anything, but I nodded. And that night, while she slept soundly next to me, I stared at the ceiling for 4 hours and started building a plan so quiet, so careful, so deliberately calm that she would never see it coming. Let me give you just enough context to understand what was actually happening in that apartment. Brooke and I had been together for 3 years. We'd moved in together 14 months ago, a 2-bedroom place in a decent part of the city, our names on a joint lease, our lives folded together in that specific way where you can't remember which coffee maker was yours before. I was 29. She was 28. On paper, we were doing well. In reality, I'd been watching something erode for about 8 months. Nothing dramatic at first, just small things. Things that, if you showed them to someone else one at a time, they'd tell you to relax. But when you stack them, when you line them up quietly in your own mind at 2 in the morning, they start to look like a pattern. Cole was the first name in that pattern. Brooke had dated Cole for about 2 years before she and I got together. She told me about him early on, described it as a mutual fizzle, 2 people who were great friends but terrible as a couple. I hadn't been threatened by that. People have pasts. I wasn't walking into her life expecting her history to be blank. But then Cole had started resurfacing. First it was a mutual friend's birthday dinner. He was there. She hadn't warned me. No big deal. Then it was a random lunch she mentioned 3 days after it happened. Then it was texting that I only found out about because her phone lit up while we were watching a movie and I saw his name. When I asked about the texting, she'd said, "We're just friends." "Why is that a problem for you?" I told her it wasn't the friendship. It was the feeling that information was being managed around me. She said I was insecure. I let it go. I shouldn't have let it go. So when she sat across from me that Tuesday night and dropped the Cancun news like it was a scheduling update, it wasn't actually the first time Cole had taken up space in our relationship. It was just the loudest time. And the thing about loud moments is, they clarify everything that came before them. All those quiet Tuesday dinners where she was distracted. The way she'd laugh differently when she talked about something funny he'd sent her. The 3 occasions I could name where she described him in a sentence that ended with "he really gets me." I had filed all of those away. I hadn't confronted them directly. And now she was telling me she'd bought plane tickets to Mexico with this man. Not asked me. Not discussed it. Bought them. Already. And the framing, "You need to trust me," was designed to make any objection I raised look like a character flaw. She was smart like that. I'll give her that much. The next morning, she acted like nothing had happened. Made her usual green smoothie. Kissed me on the cheek on her way out the door. Reminded me that dry cleaning needed to be picked up. I said, "I'll get it." And I watched her car pull out of the lot. Then I sat down at the kitchen table, opened my laptop, and pulled up the lease agreement. I read every line. I found the clause I was looking for, 60 days written notice for either party to vacate in the event of mutual dissolution or individual exit under agreed terms. But there was also a secondary clause that applied if both leaseholders were in agreement. I took a photo of that clause. Then I called my friend Pete. Pete and I had been friends since college. He's the kind of person who doesn't ask too many questions and doesn't offer opinions you didn't request. When I told him I needed to talk, he said, Bar or coffee? I said coffee. And bring time. We sat in a corner booth and I laid it out for him. Not emotionally. Methodically. I told him about Qley. About the tickets. About the phrase "you need to trust me." About the 8 months of accumulated small things that had led to this moment. Pete listened without interrupting. When I finished, he looked at his cup for a second and then said, "What are you going to do?" I said, "I'm going to let her go." He looked up. "I mean the trip?" he asked. "No," I said. "I mean everything." Pete nodded slowly. He didn't tell me I was overreacting. He didn't tell me to fight for it. He didn't give me a speech about communication. He just said, "What do you need from me?" And that simple, quiet question was one of the most solid things anyone had said to me in months. I told him I needed his truck on Wednesday night and his couch for a couple of weeks while I found a place. He said, "Done." Now let me be clear about something. Because if you're reading this and you're thinking I went from zero to nuclear in one conversation, you're not seeing the full picture. The trip wasn't the reason I decided to leave. The trip was the confirmation. There's a difference. A reason is a single event that changes everything. A confirmation is the moment when a single event shows you that everything was already changed. You just hadn't admitted it yet. I had been lying to myself for months. I had been telling myself that the weird feeling I carried around wasn't real, that I was projecting, that relationships require patience and trust, and I should extend grace. But grace has limits. And when your girlfriend buys plane tickets to spend a week in Cancun with her ex-boyfriend and frames your objection as a trust deficit, grace isn't what the moment requires. Clarity is. And I was finally, completely, almost painfully clear. She texted me around noon that Wednesday. "Hey, have you thought about what I said? I really need you to be okay with this." I stared at that message for a long time. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because of what she was actually asking. She wasn't asking if I was okay. She was asking me to perform okay. She needed my compliance so she could board that plane on Thursday without discomfort. She wanted a clean exit, my blessing packaged neatly, handed over without mess. I typed back, "I'm fine. Have a great trip. Don't worry about me." She responded with a single heart emoji. That emoji told me everything I needed to confirm about her emotional state. She was relieved. Not grateful. Not reassured. Just relieved. Like a problem had been solved. I set my phone face down on my desk and got back to work. That evening I came home, and she was already packing. There was a suitcase open on the bed, her good sundresses laid out across the comforter, her travel-sized toiletries lined up on the nightstand. She was humming. Actually humming. I stood in the doorway for a moment and just watched her. She looked happy. Genuinely. Openly happy in a way I realized I hadn't seen in a long time. And that observation didn't make me angry. It made me sad. Then it made me certain. "Looking good," I said, nodding toward the suitcase. She turned and smiled. "I always overpack. You know me." I didn't know her. That was sort of the problem. I knew her well enough to know that this level of glow didn't happen for standard travel. This was anticipation. This was the particular brightness people get when they're about to be somewhere they want to be, with someone they want to be with. I helped her fold a cardigan without being asked. She thanked me. I said, "Of course." And I meant it in a way she didn't understand. She left early Thursday morning. I drove her to the airport. We hugged at the drop-off curb. She told me she'd text when she landed. I told her to enjoy herself. She kissed me quickly, grabbed her bag, and walked through the sliding doors. She didn't look back. I sat in the car for a moment. Then I drove home. And the moment I walked through that apartment door, I switched into a different mode entirely. Calm, focused, deliberate. I made a list on my phone. Moving out. Call landlord about lease termination or transition. Start packing personal items, clothing, documents, tech, sentimental items. Pete's truck available Wednesday evening. Rent a storage unit for furniture or larger items. Finances. Transfer personal savings from joint savings account to individual account. Close credit card that had her as an authorized user. Update direct deposit with HR. Cancel any shared subscriptions. Logistics. Forward mail to Pete's address temporarily. Update address with bank, employer, and insurance. Notify utilities. Have my name removed from shared accounts. Final. Leave keys. No note required. I didn't write that list in rage. I wrote it in the same energy you'd use to plan a home improvement project. Step by step. Practical. Unemotional. Because when you've spent enough time sitting with a decision before you make it, the execution doesn't feel dramatic. It just feels like completing something. I called the landlord Thursday afternoon. His name was Gerald, a no-nonsense guy in his 60s who'd been managing properties for 30 years and had seen everything twice. I explained the situation as simply as I could. I needed to exit the lease, my co-leaseholder would remain, and I wanted to know what the process looked like. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "She knows you're doing this?" I said, "She will when she returns." Another pause. Then, "That's your business, son. Come by the office tomorrow, and we'll sort out the paperwork." I said, "Thank you, Gerald." He said, "Good luck." Friday morning, I went to the leasing office. Gerald had the paperwork ready. Under the terms of our lease, one leaseholder could be removed if the remaining leaseholder could demonstrate financial ability to cover rent independently. Brooke made good money at her marketing firm. She could cover it without question, which meant this wasn't going to cause her a housing crisis. I want to be clear about that. I wasn't trying to destroy her life. I wasn't trying to leave her homeless or financially wrecked. I was extracting myself. There's a meaningful difference. Gerald walked me through the forms. I signed where I needed to sign. I paid a small administrative fee, and by Friday afternoon, my name was in the process of being removed from the lease. He told me the transition would be complete within 30 days, but that I could vacate immediately since Brooke would remain as sole leaseholder. I thanked him, went back to the apartment, started packing. I was methodical about it. Not frantic, not emotional, just systematic. I started with the things that were unambiguously mine: clothes, shoes, my personal laptop, my external hard drives, my grandfather's watch that I kept in a small box in the back of the sock drawer. Then I moved to the shared spaces. My books, my coffee equipment. I'd bought the espresso machine before we moved in. My toolbox, the vinyl record collection I'd spent 4 years building. The good cast iron pan that had been a birthday gift from my mother. I didn't take anything that was hers. I didn't take anything that was ambiguous. If there was any genuine question about who it belonged to, I left it. I filled box after box and stacked them in the second bedroom. By Friday night, that room looked like a small, organized warehouse. I ordered pizza, ate it standing up at the kitchen counter, drank a beer. Brooke texted at some point. "Arrived safely. This place is gorgeous. Wish you could see it." I typed back, "Glad you made it. Enjoy." She sent a photo of the ocean view from what appeared to be a balcony. I looked at it for exactly 3 seconds, set my phone down, went back to packing. Saturday, I handled the finances. I want to explain this carefully because I know it's the part people will have the most reactions to. We had a joint savings account. That account held money from both of us, contributions we'd each made over the roughly 14 months we'd lived together. I went to the bank and I withdrew my contributions. Not her contributions. Mine. I had records. I had the transaction history. I knew exactly what I'd put in and what she'd put in because we'd both tracked it in a shared spreadsheet we'd set up when we first moved in. I took what was mine. I left what was hers. I opened an individual account at a different bank and transferred everything over. The teller didn't ask any questions. I didn't offer any explanations. I also called the credit card company and removed Brooke as an authorized user. I updated my direct deposit with HR on Saturday via the employee portal. By Saturday evening, my financial life was cleanly separated from hers. Pete came over Sunday morning with his truck. I told him to come around 9. He showed up at 8:55 with coffee for both of us, which I hadn't asked for, but genuinely appreciated. We didn't talk much. That's one of Pete's best qualities. He's not a talker when talking isn't what the moment calls for. We loaded boxes. We loaded furniture, the things that were clearly mine. The bookshelf I'd assembled before we met, the side table from my old apartment, the desk I'd bought for the second bedroom that had eventually become a catch-all for her work stuff. The bedroom furniture was mostly joint purchases. I left it. I took my portion of the kitchen items, again, the things I could clearly identify as pre-relationship acquisitions or clearly personal gifts. We made 3 trips with the truck. 2 loads went to the storage unit I'd rented. The final load went to Pete's place, which would be my temporary base. By Sunday afternoon, the apartment was not empty, but it was mine-free. Everything of hers remained. The couch, the bed, her art on the walls, her kitchen stuff, her bookshelf. The space still looked like a home, just not mine. I did one final walkthrough. I was methodical about it. Every drawer, every cabinet, every shelf. I wanted to make sure I hadn't taken anything of hers by mistake, and I wanted to make sure I hadn't left anything of mine by accident. I stood in the middle of the living room when I was done. 3 years, 14 months in this apartment. I looked at the wall where we'd hung a framed photo from a trip we'd taken early in our relationship. A weekend up the coast, back when things were good, back when her laughter felt like it was meant for me. I'd looked at that photo 100 times. I left it on the wall. It was hers now. I put my key on the kitchen counter. Just the one key. Set it flat, in the middle, where it couldn't be missed. No note. I'd thought about a note. I'd even drafted one in my head. But anything I could have written would have been either too much or too little. And she would find out everything she needed to know the moment she walked through that door. Some things don't need a sentence. They speak for themselves. I left. The week she was gone was one of the strangest of my life. Not because I was devastated. Because I wasn't. And that absence of devastation was itself something I had to sit with. I'd expected grief. I'd braced for those waves of what did I just do that usually follow a major decision. They didn't come. What came instead was this quiet, low-level relief. Like pressure I'd stopped noticing was suddenly gone. Like I'd been holding my shoulders tight for 8 months, and someone had finally told me I could put them down. I stayed at Pete's. Slept on his couch, which was surprisingly decent. Woke up in the mornings without that low hum of something is wrong that I'd become so accustomed to that I'd stopped identifying it as wrong and started calling it normal. That hum was gone. In its place was just silence, and I could breathe in it. Brooke texted every day or two. Nothing heavy. Resort updates. Meal photos. A sunset over the water. She mentioned Cole exactly once, in passing, something like, Cole's friend really came through with this place. I responded to each message with something neutral. Looks beautiful. Nice. Glad you're having fun. She had no idea. She was floating in a pool in Cancun, completely relaxed, operating entirely within the reality she'd constructed, where she'd managed the situation, where I'd been appropriately reasonable, where everything was fine. Meanwhile, I was 4 miles away, sleeping on Pete's couch, with my entire life cleanly and quietly relocated. The contrast would have been darkly funny if I'd let myself find it funny. I was saving it for later. Midweek, Pete asked me how I was doing. We were watching something on his TV, half paying attention, and he just turned to me during a commercial and asked it plainly. I thought about it for a moment. I'm okay, I said. Like actually okay. Not performing okay. He nodded. Any second guessing? I considered. No, I said. Not really. I think I second guessed for months before. By the time I actually moved, the guessing was done. Pete was quiet for a second. Then he said, you know some people are going to say you should have just talked to her. I know, I said. What would you say to that? I thought about the conversation at the kitchen table. About the preloaded patience on her face. About you need to trust me. About the heart emoji. I'd say I tried talking, I said. Multiple times. Over months. And every time I brought something up, it got reframed as my insecurity. So eventually I stopped talking and started watching. And what I watched was enough. Pete nodded. He turned back to the TV. That was the end of that conversation. There was one moment that week that I want to tell you about. Because it's important. Thursday afternoon, exactly 1 week after she'd left, I was sitting in Pete's kitchen with a cup of coffee and I pulled up her Instagram. She'd posted 3 times during the trip. The first was the ocean view from the balcony. Captioned, needed this more than I knew. The second was a table full of food and drinks at some outdoor restaurant. She was in the shot, tan, smiling, a cocktail in hand. Cole was in that photo too. He was laughing at something off camera. He had his arm around her shoulders in the easy, comfortable way of someone who doesn't have to think about whether that's okay. I looked at that photo for a long time. Not because it confirmed something shocking. Because it confirmed something I'd been trying not to see for a long time. The way she was leaning into him slightly. The way she was completely, entirely relaxed. The way she looked the same way she had standing at the bedroom mirror Thursday morning, packing her sundresses. I closed the app, put my phone face down, drank my coffee, and I thought, she didn't fall out of love with me during this trip. She'd been falling for a while. I'd just been the last one to stop pretending otherwise. She came home on a Friday. I know this because she texted me from the airport. Landed. Heading home. Missed you. Can't wait to see you. I read that message. I read it twice. Can't wait to see you. I wondered if she meant it. I think she probably did, in whatever version of the situation existed inside her head. She'd had a wonderful week. She was tan and relaxed and happy. She was coming home to what she assumed was a functioning relationship with a boyfriend who had trusted her and given her space, and was now waiting patiently in the apartment they shared. She had no idea she was coming home to an echo. I didn't respond to the text. I thought about responding. I didn't. Pete told me later that she'd called him. About 40 minutes after she would have gotten home, according to his estimate. He was at work. He stepped into the hallway to take the call. She was not screaming. She wasn't crying. She was, according to Pete, speaking in a very controlled, very tight voice, like someone who is trying to sound calm because the alternative is something she couldn't let herself access yet. She asked if he'd talk to me. He said yes. She asked if he knew. He said yes. She asked where I was. He said, "You should call him." She said, "He's not answering my texts." Pete said, "Then maybe give it a minute." She hung up. He called me to give me the heads up. I thanked him, sat back on his couch, and waited. My phone rang 45 minutes later. I let it go to voicemail. She called again. I let that one go too. Then a text. "I came home, and all your stuff is gone. Please call me. I don't understand what happened." I stared at that message. I don't understand what happened. And that, right there, is the thing that hit me the hardest. Harder than the trip itself, harder than the photo, harder than the heart emoji. She genuinely didn't understand. Not because she was stupid. She wasn't stupid. She was sharp and perceptive and socially intelligent. She didn't understand because she hadn't considered me a factor that required understanding. She had managed the situation. She had said the right thing. She had handed me the trust framing, and I had taken it and gone quiet, and she had concluded, handled. She'd never looked below the surface of my okay. She'd never asked what I was actually thinking. She'd never checked in beyond the logistical. "Have you picked up the dry cleaning? Are you okay with this? Great. Perfect." For months, for 8 months, while something was clearly broken, she had managed the surface and called it communication. And now she was standing in an empty apartment. Well, not empty. Her stuff was all there, but mine was gone, and she was texting me she didn't understand. I believed her. That was the saddest part. I called her back an hour later. She picked up immediately. "What happened?" Her voice was tight, controlled. "I came home, and where is everything? Where are you? What did you do?" I said, "I moved out." Silence. "You went? Why didn't you say anything?" "Because you didn't ask." "What does that mean?" I took a breath. "Brooke, every time I tried to bring up something that was bothering me, you reframed it as my problem, my insecurity, my trust issues. So I stopped bringing things up and started paying attention. And what I paid attention to told me everything I needed to know. Because of the trip?" Her voice went slightly higher. "You did all of this because I took a vacation?" "No," I said. "I did this because of 8 months of watching something change and being told I was imagining it. The trip was just the last data point." "So you just what? You moved out while I was gone, without even telling me?" "That's..." She stopped. Started again. "That's insane. That's not how adults handle things." "Maybe not," I said. "But adults also don't book international vacations with their ex-boyfriends and then tell their partners to trust them or else they look insecure." Silence. Longer this time. "Cole is just a friend." "I know that's what you believe," I said. "What does that mean?" "It means that whether or not anything physical happened on that trip doesn't actually change what I saw. The way you talked about him. The way your energy changed every time he came up. The way you were glowing when you packed that suitcase. I wasn't imagining those things, Brooke. I never was." Nothing from her side. Just quiet. I kept going. "The problem wasn't the friendship. I told you that. The problem was that you made every conversation about it into a conversation about my character instead of about my concerns. You didn't engage with what I was saying. You just kept asking me to trust you and calling it done." When she finally spoke again, her voice had changed. Something in it had loosened slightly. Something hard had come out of it. "I didn't know you felt that way. Not this seriously." "I know you didn't," I said. "That's exactly the problem." She asked if we could meet. I told her I needed a few days. She said, "A few days? I just came home to half an empty apartment." "Your apartment," I said. "Your name is on the lease. The landlord has already processed the paperwork. You can afford it on your own. I made sure of that before I left." Another pause. "You planned this entire week?" "Yes." You were planning this?" "Yes." I heard her exhale sharply. Not quite a laugh. Not quite a cry. Something that landed right between the two. "I cannot believe you," she said. And I thought, that's fair. Believe me or don't believe me. But you'll believe the empty closet. I want to talk about something I've thought about a lot since then. Because this story could very easily read like I'm the hero who outsmarted someone who deserved it. And it's not that simple. Brooke wasn't a villain. She was someone who had started wanting something different than what we had. And instead of having that hard conversation, she'd managed around it. That's a very human thing to do. It's also a corrosive thing to do. Because when you manage around something long enough, the other person starts to feel the shape of whatever you're not saying without ever being told what it is. And that's what I'd been living with. the shape of something unsaid, the outline of a conversation she decided not to have with me. I deserved that conversation. I deserved, at minimum, for her to look me in the eye and say I think I still have feelings for someone else and I don't know what to do with that. I would have respected that. I would have been hurt by it, but I would have respected it. Instead, I got managed. And being managed by someone who loves you, or used to love you, is one of the loneliest feelings in the world, because it means they've decided you can't handle the truth of them. And once someone decides that, the relationship is already over. The apartment was just the formality. We met a week after she got back. Coffee. Neutral location. Middle of the day. She looked good, actually. Still a little tan from the trip. She'd dressed carefully, not overdressed, but clearly considered, like she'd thought about what the occasion called for. I noticed all of it and felt very little. That was information. We sat down, got our coffees. She wrapped both hands around her cup. For a moment, neither of us said anything. Then she said, "I've been thinking all week." Okay. And I think I didn't realize how far things had gotten. Between us. Far how? I asked. She pressed her lips together, looked at the table, looked back up. I think I've been, not present. In a way I didn't recognize was happening until I was sitting in that apartment alone with your half of the stuff gone, and I had to actually look at things without anything to do or manage or respond to. I held my coffee. Let her keep going. I don't think I knew what I was doing. With Cole, I knew we were texting, and I knew things had gotten warmer, but I told myself that was just catching up. Friendship. Reconnecting. And now? I asked. She was quiet for a moment. Now I think maybe I was lying to myself. A little. There it was. For months of what I'd been trying to get her to acknowledge. Not an accusation. Not me saying I knew it. Just, finally, the acknowledgement that something real had been happening. I nodded. She looked at me. "I'm sorry," she said. "I genuinely am. I handled things badly. I made it about your trust instead of about my own stuff. And that wasn't fair." "No," I said. "It wasn't. Do you think is there anything to?" I shook my head before she finished. Gently, but clearly. She closed her eyes for a second. When she opened them, she said, "I figured." "I know," I said. We finished our coffees. We talked a little more, practical things, mostly. The shared subscription to a streaming service she wanted to keep. A plan I'd actually left behind on purpose because I knew she loved it. A book she'd borrowed from me that we both sort of agreed she could keep. Small things. The kind of negotiations that make an ending real. When we stood up to leave, she stopped outside the door and turned to look at me. "I want you to know," she said, "that I know how this looks. What I did. The trip. All of it." "Okay," I said. "I'm not the person I was being. I don't think. I believe you," I said. And I did. In some version. "But it's too late," she said. Not a question. Just an observation. "Yeah," I said. "It's too late." She nodded once, pulled her jacket tighter, and walked in the opposite direction. "I want to tell you what happened with Cole. Because you're probably wondering. I found out through a mutual acquaintance. Someone who knew both of us, who wasn't trying to stir things up, but who mentioned it somewhat casually at a gathering a few weeks later. Brooke and Cole had started dating officially, about 3 weeks after she got back from Cancun. I didn't say anything when I heard this. The mutual acquaintance watched my face carefully, like they were waiting for a reaction. I just said, "Good for them," and meant it with exactly zero bitterness. Because the confirmation that something had already been happening, emotionally if not physically, just meant I hadn't been wrong. I hadn't overreacted. I hadn't been paranoid. I had been reading a situation correctly for months and being gaslit into doubting my own perception. And when that kind of thing gets confirmed, the emotion it produces isn't anger. It's something closer to a very tired vindication. Like finally being told you weren't imagining the noise in the walls. I got my own place 2 months after moving out. A 1-bedroom on the 3rd floor of a building with a lot of windows and a decent coffee shop 2 blocks away. I set it up slowly, deliberately, piece by piece. Things I chose entirely on my own, with no one to negotiate taste with, no one to convince or compromise with. A couch in a color she would have said was too bold. A lamp she would have found hideous and I found perfect. Books stacked the way I wanted them stacked. The cast iron pan back on its hook in a kitchen that was mine. The first morning I made coffee in that kitchen and stood by the window watching the street wake up. That was a feeling I want to be careful about describing, because it's easy to perform it as more cinematic than it was. It wasn't a movie moment. It was just quiet. It was just mine. And after the year I'd had, quiet and mine felt like more than enough. People ask me, because I've told this story to a few people in my life, Not in this format, but in real conversations. Whether I regret how I handled it. Whether I should have confronted her directly when she announced the trip. Whether I should have done the big emotional conversation instead of the quiet, strategic exit. I've thought about that honestly. And here's what I come back to. The confrontation had already happened. Multiple times. In smaller, quieter versions across 8 months. Every time I said, hey, the Qley thing is making me uncomfortable, that was a confrontation. Every time she responded with you need to trust me or this is your insecurity, that was a door closing. I hadn't run from a difficult conversation. I'd survived about 15 of them and learned that the conversation wasn't landing anywhere real. So when the 16th opportunity presented itself, her standing across the kitchen table telling me she'd already bought the tickets, I made a choice. Not to yell, not to beg, not to perform another scene where I said something vulnerable and she reframed it as evidence of my character flaws. I chose to respond in the only language that couldn't be reframed. Action. Because words, in our relationship, had become her territory. She was good with words. She knew how to arrange them so that she was always reasonable and I was always managing my reactions. But she couldn't reframe an empty closet. She couldn't argue with a key left on the counter. She couldn't tell an empty apartment that it was being paranoid. I'm not writing this to be celebrated. I want to be honest about that. I know there are people who will read this and think it's cold. Think I should have handled it differently. Think that moving out while she was on vacation was a kind of cruelty. A theatrical withholding of confrontation designed to humiliate. I've sat with that critique. I don't think it's accurate, but I understand why it exists. Here's where I land. I didn't move out to punish her. I moved out because staying, through that trip, through whatever came after, would have required me to keep performing a relationship that had already ended. I wasn't willing to do that anymore. I'd been performing for 8 months. I'd been nodding and adjusting and extending grace and managing my reactions and asking one more time if we could talk about this, and then being told I was the problem. I was done performing. The exit was clean. It was fair, financially, logistically, practically. I didn't take anything of hers. I left her with a functioning home. I made sure she could carry the lease. The timing felt dramatic, I know. But the timing was also the only window I had. While she was gone, I could move without having to have a conversation that she would have turned into a negotiation about my character. That window opened. I used it. There's one more thing I want to say. About trust. Because that word was the center of her whole framing, and I think it deserves to be addressed directly. You need to trust me. That sentence is designed to make the other person prove something. It positions trust as a character trait that the listener either has or lacks. And if they lack it, that's their failure. But trust isn't a virtue you perform to prove you're a good partner. Trust is something that gets built over time, through consistency, through transparency, through the experience of watching someone choose you, clearly and without ambiguity, in moments when they didn't have to. Brooke had not been building trust with me. She'd been asking me to produce it on demand, while she did exactly the things that eroded it. That's not a trust deficit. That's a manufacturing error. You can't ask someone to manufacture trust from nothing and then tell them they're broken when the supply runs out. I wasn't broken. I was just honest, finally, privately, completely, about what I was actually looking at. And what I was looking at was a relationship that had quietly ended before either of us had formally acknowledged it. I just happened to be the one who processed that reality first. And when I did, I behaved accordingly. Last thing. A few months after everything, I ran into Brooke at a farmer's market in the neighborhood. She was with Qley. I saw them from a distance before they saw me, and for a half second I considered turning down a different aisle. I didn't. I walked in their direction, and when she looked up and saw me, there was a microsecond of something complicated in her face. Not guilt exactly. More like the specific discomfort of a chapter you thought was closed suddenly being open in front of you. Qley saw me too. He didn't say anything. He looked at Brooke and then at me with the careful neutrality of someone who knows more about a situation than they're supposed to. I nodded at both of them. Said hey. She said hey. And that was it. We moved past each other. I bought some tomatoes from a vendor 2 stalls down. Walked home. Made lunch. Lived my life. That's the whole story. No explosive final confrontation. No dramatic apology. No tearful reconciliation scene. No victory lap. Just a woman who came home from vacation relaxed and smiling, walked into a space where my presence used to be, and found an echo instead. And a man who, for the first time in a long time, felt entirely and completely like himself. I don't need her to understand that completely. I don't need anyone to agree with my choices. I just needed to stop being managed by someone who had already moved on but hadn't been willing to say so. And when I finally stopped accepting the management, everything got very clear, very quiet, and very mine. I still sleep better now than I did for the last 8 months of that relationship. That's not nothing. That's actually everything. If you've been sitting with a feeling for months that you keep being told is your problem, I'd ask you to reconsider that. Your instincts aren't always right, but they're not always wrong, either. And the loudest sign that something is broken isn't always a fight. Sometimes it's a heart emoji from someone who's already halfway somewhere else. Learn the difference. That's it. That's all I've got.